Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays on the Pagan Perspective, and this week we are talking about God the Father. This week's topic comes from Rose Kicking, and this is a nice juicy topic that is bound to make people rather emotional, possibly even angry, who knows. So this is a long topic, it'll be in the description. The basic idea is talking about the idea of God the Father in paganism because it's not very emphasized, talking about the God's role as our father. There's more focus on the mother-son relationship and also the bride-consort relationship, and bringing up that part of this is giving focus to the mother that was not allowed for years and years in other religions, sort of giving her due in that way, but also then talking about life needs a mother and a father to be created. With stay-at-home dads and same-sex parents, there's a lot more of a bigger role of the father in nurturing and child rearing and in the home, things like that. And then noting that obviously bad fathers still exist, bad mothers also exist. So, do you think that Father God has an important place in paganism? Do you think it's possible to see him in the more positive, nurturing aspects of fatherhood rather than just being the consort to the mother or the oppressive father of Christianity? Woo, there's a lot in there. So, firstly, the first thing that stuck out to me when reading that, the few times that I read it, is the idea that life needs a mother and a father to be created, and then went on to say that the mother cannot give birth without the father. So I think the first thing that really comes up in all this is defining how each of us sees the term mother and father. Because sometimes those terms are just, scientific terms meaning biological parents. Other times those terms are really reserved for the people who really care and nurture and raise children, or someone who has played that really pivotal role in your life. So that's the thing that stuck out to me. I am the child of a single parent, and that has always been the way it is for me. So the way that I view the world is very different than someone I feel who has two very strong, very involved parental figures, whether they are same-sex or opposite sex or whatever. I truly feel that depending on the way we were all raised, we see the world differently because of that. So to me, when I read something like life needs a mother and a father to be created, I revert to the scientific truth of the matter, which is that you need an egg and a sperm to create life, and that happens everywhere from human beings all throughout the animal kingdom to also the plant kingdom. When plants reproduce, there has to be an egg and sperm type deal, pollination, whatever is required. That's really what it is. I don't see the words mother and father necessarily having to be involved in that, because when you look at it, all the different ways that it happens, the words or the titles, mother and father, don't necessarily relate to that. Now, when we're talking about human beings, we tend to revert to mother and father when we mean these biological parents, the people who provided the egg and the sperm. But that's not always the case for everyone. So I think that's the first place we need to look, is how do we feel about these words? Who do we feel deserves these terms and these titles of honor? There are many different ways to think of it, right? So you have people like me who were raised by single parents. Many of my friends also are largely single parents. Then you have, as Rose mentioned in the topic, you have gay couples or same-sex couples. There are also things like artificial insemination, where you may or may not know who the sperm donor is. Sometimes it's someone that you want to father your child. Sometimes it's from a bank where you don't really know that person and they are never involved in the impregnation or pregnancy or birthing process at all, except that their sperm is the one being used. There's also things like surrogacy, where the being who is actually giving birth, going through the pregnancy and giving birth, is not necessarily the mother of the child or either parent of the child. And then, of course, there's adoption, where you then have a biological mother versus the adoptive parents, and, all these different things. So I think that's the first place we need to look, and need to look at all of those different things. So then for me, going into my personal associations with whether God the Father has a place in paganism, well, when you say that, first of all, paganism is a huge group, right? It's a huge overarching group. No two pagans do things the same way. So for anyone to say that God the Father does not have any place in paganism is silly, because there's so many different people in that group, there are so many different beliefs and paths and practices in that group, that of course there's a place for that somewhere. Now I'm just going to talk about my view, which is not that there isn't a place if it were to exist, but that in my practice it's not a big thing. And there's probably a few reasons for that. Number one, my IRL connections with the father archetype, my real life connections. As I mentioned, I am the child of a single parent. My mother raised me entirely by herself. The only men kind of in my life growing up were my mother's consorts, if you will, different boyfriends or fiancés, and now her husband, and my uncles and any of my male cousins, my brother, and teachers, friends, my own boyfriends and lovers and consorts, and things like that. So that's where the male energy, I hesitate to even say that because, of course, as you know, all of these things are a spectrum, but when we're talking about people, beings who are sort of defined by everyone as being cisgendered males, that's where they have taken place in my life. I don't have anyone, even my uncles, even my teachers, none of them ever really seemed like a quote-unquote father figure to me. I just never needed one. I never sort of felt that emptiness that I felt needed to be filled with a father figure. Now, I've had boyfriends who have had both of their parents and their fathers treated me like their daughter, but it was never the same connection. You know, that's never something that I knew what it felt like. So it's not something that I missed. It's not something that I felt a strong connection to. So in real life, those are the men who were in my life were in all of those aforementioned roles. Then when you look at my practice, there was a lot, of course, in the beginning, there was a lot of that pushback of just coming out of the religion that I was raised in that completely ignored the mother aspect. So there was a lot of wanting to connect to the goddess because I was raised by a single mother and I wanted to honor that. I also am cisgendered female, so that played a lot in my role of wanting to connect with that energy. And I was never that close to any, like I said, any male aspect. So there was a lot of that not wanting to connect to the oppressive father god from previous religions that I felt had no place in my practice. So that was a big part of it for sure. And then over the past, however many years I've been practicing now, over a decade, throughout the past several years, I have sort of, gotten to a place in my practice where okay, that was a thing, and now we can really work on bringing the two back together in a balance. So I've done a lot of work with asking the horned god and asking male deities to show how they can be connected with my life and show me how I need their input and their whatever they have to offer, their gifts. And whenever I have done that, I have had multiple male, quote unquote, deities come to me with messages, connections, different types of relationships, and none of them have ever been in a father aspect. When deity comes to me, it is typically with the God aspect, it is in a form of teacher. More often than not, it's a lover type aspect, and sometimes merely as like a friend, but never has that aspect come to me in the guise of a father. And I truly believe that deity comes to us all differently. Deity comes to us in the way that they know we can recognize it, or in the way that they feel we need at the time. And so they choose what is best for each of us. They choose what makes the most sense, what we need to hear at the time. And for me, that has always been friends, teachers, lovers. It's never been as a parental figure. Even the goddess has never really come to me as a parental figure, but a lot of the time I do associate them more with mothers and grandmothers if they're in that kind of maternal role. So I think that, going back to the beginning where I said paganism is a huge thing and we all do things different ways, I feel like God the Father as an aspect absolutely has a place in some people's practice, and therefore there is some place for it within paganism because there are so many of us, and a lot of people would relate to God the Father in this aspect. So yes, there is a place for it in your practice if you make a place for it, or if you need him to fulfill that place. And if that isn't something that resonates with your practice, or isn't something that you feel that you need, or that Deity feels that you need, I don't think it's necessarily saying there is no place for you in my practice ever. It's just that there isn't anyone fulfilling that now, and there isn't a need for anyone to be fulfilling that now. Probably, if we're honest, probably in the future, if I were to have a child and there were a father involved in that, then the God the Father aspect would become much more relevant to my life. So probably, I'm just guessing that that would be where that would come in. But were that not to happen, there isn't currently a space for that or a need for that. Does that make sense? So I absolutely understand why a lot of people do not give emphasis to God as the Father aspect. And I also recognize that sometimes we want to because maybe we feel that we should, quote unquote. You know, I like to say, as someone said to me once, or I heard someone say once, that we shouldn't should on ourselves, or don't should on yourself. So we don't just do things because we think that we ought to, or that, because basically what that means is that we think other people think that we should do it. So we kind of force that upon ourselves. So I feel like in a lot of cases we might be thinking, oh, I really need to connect with this aspect because without that I'm not truly balanced and I'm not truly doing whatever. And there may be people out there saying, if you don't connect to this, this, and this, then you're not really doing blah, blah, blah. But I think we need to remember that we're all doing our own work and everyone's path is different. And if you want to connect to that archetypal energy, or if that sort of presents itself to you and you welcome that relationship, then that is awesome. If you don't, it's not anyone else's responsibility to tell you that you need that. Your deciding whether or not you need something like that should come from you and your connection with whatever your higher power is, whether that's your connection with the universe, your connection with Deity. If a Deity comes to you in a certain aspect and says, you know, you need this relationship right now, you are still free to say yes or no. But I feel like if that were to come to me, I'd have to think about it a little bit more and say, okay, do I need this? And then you're always free to say yes or no. But if that doesn't happen, then I think it's perfectly okay to say, okay, we don't need that role fulfilled right now. And then, of course, if you want to flip this on its head just for your own discussion, if you're someone who's having trouble connecting with Goddess as the mother archetype, it's basically this same conversation sort of turned on its side because, of course, there is the aspect of the mothers typically being the ones who give birth or actually carry the life. So there's that difference between the mother title and the father title, the egg and the sperm roles. But everything else kind of goes along the same lines. So if you're someone who's been raised nominally by a father, it might be much easier for you to connect with God as the father than Goddess as the mother. And I know for me, for some reason, I was thinking of this before I started the video, that, you know, there's just these overall kind of almost fairy tale archetypes of Mother Nature and Father Time. And Mother Nature is so prevalent throughout kind of everyone's consciousness that you almost always hear people talking about Mother Nature, whether they're talking about her in a positive aspect or a negative aspect. Like when the weather is not good, people start making fun of Mother Nature's mood swings and things like that, which I think is rude. But also there's much less emphasis given to Father Time, sort of, at all. And like when I work with time as an ally, I've never thought of time as being gendered at all, but we do have that sort of little childlike archetype of Father Time and Mother Nature. So that might be another thing to look into and think about. I was looking back over the topic and I just realized there's one more thing I sort of want to speak to, which is the final question was, do you think the Father God has an important place, and do you think it's possible to see him in the more positive, nurturing aspects of fatherhood? That bit of phrase I didn't really address earlier. To me, the positive, nurturing aspects of maleness don't necessarily have to equate with fatherhood. So, of course, yes, you can see those, but also there are, as you mentioned, Rose, in the topic, there are a lot of examples of bad fathers as well. So I feel like there's nothing saying that the positive, nurturing aspects of maleness have to be equated with fatherhood, that that's the only way we can see them, because I constantly see the positive, nurturing, caring, gentle aspects of maleness and of the God, but not in the father role, right? So even in my personal life, that comes from my friends. Some of my male friends are some of the most caring, nurturing men I know. And that also comes in the form of lovers. It also comes in the form of, like, my brother is a really sweet guy, you know? And so these are aspects that you can see within male deity without them having to be fatherly aspects. There are other ways that you can relate to people other than that parental child association. So, and likewise, people can exhibit the positive, nurturing, caring, gentle aspects of the feminine or the female archetype, the divine feminine, without being in a motherhood role. I'm not a mother, but I would think that a lot of people who know me would attribute those aspects to me regardless of the fact that I have not given birth and I do not raise my own children at this time. So that's just another thing I wanted to mention. If those aspects do speak to parenthood to you and they do speak to the mother and father titles and roles, then that is one way of looking at it that is valid. Sorry, someone knocked on my door. But anyway, once again, if those are aspects that do not speak to you in a parental role, they do not have to go merely hand in hand. So there are ways that you can see both positive and negative in both or all, however many, aspects of the divine you recognize. You can see positive and negative sides of all of them, regardless of the exact archetypal role that they are in. Those things do not only belong to one aspect. So that's my answer to that question. That's my video for this week, and I will see you over on my personal channel, CuteWitch772, when I'm not here, and I will see you back here next month, because next week is Subs Week. So spend a little bit of time today thinking about your associations with the father and mother titles and positions in your life, both in real life and in your spiritual life, and see whether they overlap and how those connections could be made if you wanted them to. And I will see you next time. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.